For the first time in quite a while, I'm actually going to be reviewing a horror game. Now, before I talk about this game that I'll be reviewing today, which of course is Condemned to Bloodshot, I have to give a little bit of a backstory about my relationship with horror games. You see, I've played horror games my whole life, games like Clock Tower, Eternal Darkness, Silent Hill, and Resident Evil, even obscure ones like Fatal Frame, Cold Fear, Siren, and even Echo Knight. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I've been around the block and then some. So, that being said, I guess I have what you would say is a strange love-hate relationship with horror games. Whenever I do come across a great, genuinely scary or frightening game, it's like the best thing in the world to me. Yet at the same time, I have this seething hatred for this genre because when the games are terrible, or when developers think that jump scares is what makes a scary game scary, it completely ruins the games for me to the point where I really don't ever want to touch another one again, as incredibly stupid as that might sound to you. Jump scares are the laziest, most boring way to scare people, mostly because they are not scary. It's just a sudden image followed by a loud sound effect or even a music cue, and that's all they are. They're not scary. That just startles you because you're not expecting it. You know what's equivalent to that? Turning on your car, not realizing you left the stereo on full blast. It's literally the exact same feeling you get with jump scares. There's no lasting effect from it. You won't ever think about it hours after it happened because they're so insignificant. This might sound ridiculous for me to bitch and moan about this sort of subject, but I've been holding this stuff back for like a decade, and I feel it needs to be said. But whatever, let's get on with the damn review already.
Man. I'm done. That's it.
So, Condemned to Bloodshot, a game that was released in 2008 for the 360 and PS3. This is a sequel to the original title, Condemned Criminal Origins, which came out in 2005 for the 360 and then a year later for the PC. Published by Sega and developed by all companies Monolith Productions. Why does that matter? This wasn't their first go-around with a horror game, no. In fact, they made arguably one of the more popular horror games on the PS3 and 360 generation, F.E.A.R 1 and F.E.A.R 2 Project Origin. But Monolith were not the developers behind F.E.A.R 3, which was basically just Call of Duty with ghosts, paranormal dumb shit, and really everyone hated it. Monolith were also the developers behind those two Middle-earth games, the No One Lives Forever titles, Shogo, and a few others. With them being behind the first two F.E.A.R games, I figured, okay, those games didn't scare me at all, but at least I would consider them to be good games and enjoyable. So if nothing else, maybe I would feel that same way with Condemned 2. At least that was my way of going into it. So let's talk about the story. It takes place 11 months after the original events of the first game. From what I was able to pick up, whatever happened in that previous game has now caused mass hysteria and increase in violence and murder across Metro City, where this whole thing takes place in. You play as an ex-SCU agent named Ethan Thomas, who, after the results of whatever happened in that last game, is now homeless, a raging alcoholic, and he has weird visions, dreams, and hallucinations that pop up from time to time. The beginning of the game has you uncover the whereabouts of a Mr. Van Horn, while you're tagged along with some soldiers who went out of their way to find you at a bar. I have no idea why either. Maybe I missed something. I think possibly it's because Ethan knew who Van Horn was, so they wanted to use him to track Van Horn down, or something. You end up finding Van Horn very much so dead. He was killed in a gruesome, almost cult-like manner, and then shit really starts to hit the fan. Those soldiers who originally recruited Ethan end up running off with the body of Van Horn and for some reason want Ethan dead. Was it because he's a liability, or maybe they fear him because he's a borderline psychopath? I don't think that was well established, at least at the beginning unless there was like a throwaway line there somewhere that I missed. Even though this is an old game, I really don't want to spoil the story too much because it was very interesting, and to be honest with you, I really enjoyed it. Even if there was a lot of cliches and dumb shit and a lot of questions I had while playing, which leads me to this question: is it necessary to play the original game to understand what is going on in Condemned 2? Well, yes and no. If anything, it's maybe harder to understand what the hell is going on at times, or really why any of these things are even happening. But the story does unfold, and things do start to make more sense around like the halfway mark. I have not played the original game, but after playing this, it really makes me want to try out Criminal Origins. Plus, I hear the original one plays different to the sequel here, so that alone is interesting to me. The story is far from perfect. There's a lot of silly things about it, or moments that made me unintentionally laugh because they were so ridiculous, but you know what? It's totally fine. I enjoyed it at the end of the day. The way I look at it, if I could play a game and be interested in what's going on, not skipping a single cutscene, and wanting to play more of that game to see what's going to happen next, you know, I'll consider that a positive. I was shocked as far as to how long this game was. There's 11 levels in total, and it took me around 9 hours to complete, which is a pretty long time for a linear game like this, and to be honest, it really didn't need to be that long at all. They could have shortened down some of the levels that dragged on for an unnecessary amount of time. In my opinion, no problem. As you've probably witnessed now, this game is really ugly visually. Part of it due to, it being 2008 and games weren't anywhere near as polished as they would be a few years later. But then I think they intentionally made this game look the way it did for style. I mean, look at it. It's very dark, eerie, everything looks filthy and disgusting. There's blood, graffiti, and junk everywhere. You can see that the setting of the game matches the story, which is important because if a city is turning to shit, there's tons of homeless and violence, it should kind of look the part, right? And they did that perfectly in this game. My only gripe about the graphics that I was really not happy with was the frame rate randomly dropping for no apparent reason, and that's both in combat and just walking around. So that's very annoying. I can handle an ugly game, I can handle a dated one, no problems, but frame rate dropping or slow down speeds, that's almost impossible for me to look past. Another thing they did a wonderful job with is the sound design. The game's background music also fits to the tone of the setting and the atmosphere of the game. It's very dark, it's low in pitch, there's tons of eerie, droning music going on that borders right on the line of unsettling. The acting, it's not great. It's kind of odd, to be honest. Sometimes it's passable, and then other times it's like really bad. And I think a lot of that has to do with some of the dialogue that was given to the actors involved. Some of it sounds like they were just reading it off of a script verbatim without giving any personal touches or improvising any of the lines at all, and it's very noticeable. The sound effects are fine for the most part. Wasn't a big fan of how the guns sound in the game. They sound like cap guns, which I thought was kind of odd since guns are very hard to come by. So I figured they'd have, I don't know if this makes any sense, but more of an impact for that very reason. Is that a weird thing to say? I don't know, whatever.
We're here.
Stay still, you're losing a lot of blood.
I need to get up. I need to keep moving.
I don't think that's a good... We need to get get you to a hospital. I'm going up.
The gameplay is different. They mixed 3 genres into one: survival horror, crime investigation, and a first-person shooter. But it's done really well, surprisingly. To touch on the crime investigation thing, I wish there was more of it, honestly. Sometimes you'll do an investigation segment once a level, and then others there's like 2, maybe 3 segments. And these segments involve you searching the rooms for clues or evidence using some of the tools you get, like a UV light or a camera. And in those segments, you're often involved in answering a handful of questions involving whatever task you're a part of. The rest of the gameplay is more of you progressing throughout the levels, fighting off and surviving against waves of various enemies using mostly hand-to-hand combat. You can pick up weapons like a crowbar, pipes, bowling balls, conduit, even a prosthetic arm, which is weird the more I think about it. The hand-to-hand combat is done okay. It's not as good as something like that one Chronicles of Riddick game, but still, you can block, parry, counter, as well as perform a handful of different combos. Like I said, there's not that many guns in this game whatsoever, and even when you do find a gun, you are usually stuck with whatever ammo is in that mag, and that's all you typically get. Yes, there are times where you can technically find ammo, but those times are so few and far in between that you'll rarely ever hold onto a gun for that long during a level. Also, I have to point out that when you do pick up a gun, you cannot aim it well at all. You end up shaking it around all over the place with very little control. But then once you drink a bottle of alcohol, you can regain that control back of the gun, and you're able to aim perfectly fine. This is a brilliant idea, minus the whole alcohol thing. I would have preferred the character just not be able to control the gun well at all due to fear and, well, losing his grip on reality. It would make more sense that way. I played through this game on the normal difficulty, and I was pretty shocked at how challenging it was. I mean, I died numerous times in this game, and most of them were because it was 100% my fault. When you have a one-on-one fight against a typical enemy, it's usually not that difficult to beat the guy, but when you're outnumbered by 2 or 3 or more enemies, you have to be very careful on your approach or else you're just gonna die. It's fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed this. In this game, even if you have a crowbar or whatever weapon, you never feel invincible at any point. You can't just go into this game guns blazing or throwing punch after punch without doing any sort of blocking or parrying. It doesn't work like that in Condemned 2. Especially if they have weapons or guns of their own. I like the challenge of this game, and it definitely gets harder the more you progress through the story. But it never feels too difficult, at least on the normal difficulty. Now, the big question with a game like this is Condemned too scary? Well, that depends on the person. I've played so many scary games, watched so many scary movies that it takes quite a lot to scare me. Yet at the same time, this game does everything right when it comes to that fear aspect. It does not focus everything on jump scares. In fact, there's very few of them in this game. It more focuses its scary or horror elements on the atmosphere, the creepy, gruesome visuals, the dark, gritty tone to the game, the music, and my favorite, not giving the player an endless supply of ammo. It gives you the feeling that you're actually playing a survival horror, unlike other games where you never feel any sort of sense of danger. While I enjoyed the combat of the game and the gameplay in general, I think they focused a little too much on the fighting. There's really not an equal balance from combat to scary elements. I mean, once you've played through about the halfway point in the story, it begins to get repetitive and you start to fear the enemy less and less, since at this point you've most likely understood how to parry, counter, and in general just learned how to fight. If they toned down the amount of fights that you get involved in and focused a little bit more on the investigation elements and the psychological or atmosphere type scares, or even just more of those tense moments, I think this game would have been more enjoyable. And that's not to say I didn't enjoy the game. No, not at all. I had a good time with it, but I would have had a great time with Condemned 2 had they went about things just a little differently. So yeah, that's Condemned 2. I was pleasantly surprised by it. I did not have high hopes for this title, at least in regards to the whole scary element, and that's totally my fault because I went into this game thinking it was just going to be another F.E.A.R title or something, but it's nothing like those games. It may look like it to some extent, but Condemned 2 and F.E.A.R are completely different breeds of games. It's a damn shame that this is the last of the Condemned games. I would have loved to have seen a third with updated graphics, improvements overall to the game, and I would hope they would make it scarier. I mean, they did set up the story ending off with a cliffhanger, so technically there's really no reason why they couldn't make another, but I think ultimately the biggest problem with this game was it just didn't do well. It got great scores for the most part, but no one really knows about this game. It didn't sell. And it might very well have to do with a terrible decision on when they released this game. I mean, it was right smack dab around the same time as games like Smash Brawl, Devil May Cry 4, Mario Kart Wii, Assassin's Creed, and Rainbow Six Vegas 2 were released. And I don't think that Condemned 2 had much, if not any, advertising campaigns. So it was almost destined to fail commercially for that very reason. So until next time, everyone, thank you all so much for watching. This was one of my longer game reviews, but I had a lot to say, so I don't know what to tell you. Anyway, take care, everyone. I'll see you next time.